Welcome to the LowCarbUSA podcast, where we seek to inspire you to help us build this community. I'm Doug Reynolds.
And this is Pam Devine.
All right, Brett Ender, welcome.
Hey, appreciate it, Doug. Great to see you.
It's so good to finally have you on here after chatting with you so much about your experiences. Brett basically had a condition called ulcerative colitis, and the way he solved it was through keto and especially through carnivore lifestyle. But Brett, I'd like to go back to the beginning and tell us how you ended up in that situation in the first place, and then how you kind of found your way back.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's great. And it's definitely a story that I think a lot of people that have Crohn's, colitis, IBS, part of the issue is that people don't necessarily get comfortable or they're not vulnerable talking about some of these issues, which is why I think a lot of young men end up getting diagnosed with it. So that's why podcasts like this are great, because we can have an open discussion and hopefully this helps a couple people along the way. But for me, Doug, so I'm definitely an athlete by trade. I played baseball in college. So I'm from New Jersey, from the Northeast, two great parents, great sister. My mom is a great Italian cook. So I grew up prepared lunches, great dinners, definitely probably fell more into the standard American diet range. A lot of breads, a lot of pastas, not a ton of red meat for sure. But, I think I always felt like I could get away with things because I was an athlete. So I thought that I was using sugars and Gatorades and things like that to be able to fuel my performance. I graduated high school in 2012. I had about 20 or 25 Division I scholarships. So the first school that I played baseball at was Seton Hall University, which is a small Division I school in New Jersey. And that's really the first time that I started noticing some issues with my stomach. So, number one, I felt like I was putting way too much pressure on myself about the sport and about baseball. So I wasn't necessarily having fun. I was getting stressed out thinking about performing. And then on top of it all, especially now, college definitely has that culture of binge drinking. So, on a Friday or Saturday, it wasn't uncommon to have 10 plus drinks and then go back, have a pizza, have something that's fried, and just continue that cycle day in and day out. And on top of it all, I'm not sleeping particularly well, right? Because you're having those late nights. So, you think you can get away with it because you're young, but now that I look back at it, I'm thinking to myself, I was fit on the outside, but I was really unhealthy on the inside. I guess fit but unhealthy would be the term. So when I was a sophomore, I started noticing some blood in my stool for the first time. And I got my first colonoscopy when I was 20 years old. I got diagnosed with proctitis. So I took some medication for that. Symptoms started to go away. I then transferred to a Division III school in Boston called Babson College. It's a small business school. And that's when my symptoms started to get worse and worse, notably the summer of 2016. So in 2016, I was working an internship in New York City, and I was living with my parents in New Jersey. So I would commute about 2 hours by train every single day. So it was about 4 hours of commuting time in total. The beginning of that summer, I started noticing blood coming back into the equation when I was going to the bathroom. And unfortunately, a lot of what happens with patients with Crohn's, colitis, IBS, we think that it's embarrassing to talk about, or we don't really know what to do. So we just put the symptoms off. So for me, I was young and immature and just thought, it'll just heal itself naturally. I don't need to really say anything. And then I'm noticing as the summer is going on, my urgency to go to the bathroom is way more frequent. I'm continuing to have blood when I'm going to the bathroom. And I would say in August at its peak, I got to a point where I was going to the bathroom legitimately up to 30 times a day, straight blood, which I know is gruesome for lack of a better word, but like that's what was happening. And then the last day of my internship, I think I had lost close to 30 pounds, 20 to 30 pounds at that point. I could only stomach like Gatorade and saltine crackers. And then I was also throwing up blood as well. So I call my doctor. He immediately tells me that he's like, you have to go to the ER, the hospital immediately, and get another colonoscopy. I officially get diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. And then I get on a heavy dosage of REMICADE. And so REMICADE is a biologic drug. And what it does is it helps suppress these autoimmune symptoms that are occurring. So I go on a big dosage of REMICADE, and REMICADE is also, it's $65,000 per infusion. And you're told, I think, I don't know all the science behind it, but I think that there's a fear that if you go off of REMICADE, that you may grow some tolerance to it and the drug might not work. So you're told that you need to go on these drugs for the rest of your life. So I get on REMICADE. It gets me out of this chronically inflamed state, which is fantastic. But now I'm thinking to myself, okay, I have ulcerative colitis. There's no cure for it. The medication is $65,000 per infusion. So thank God I had my dad at the time had great medical insurance and was able to cover that. And this is my new normal. So I almost did not go back to school my senior year because I had lost so much weight and my stomach was in such shambles. But, luckily the medication was able to get me out of this chronically inflamed state. I was able to go back for my senior year, and I started following this low residue diet that they have me follow, which is really just, it's like lean chicken breast, rice, bananas, things that are told are bland that won't trigger your stomach, which I'm sure you and I will separately talk about in a few minutes. And, and told to lay off the alcohol. So like anything else, I follow the diet, I follow the plan, and then I gradually get a little bit sloppier as the year goes on. So I start having a couple drinks again. I start having some pizza again. And then by my senior year, I'm basically full on back into like the regular standard American diet approach for a college student. So I finish out my senior year. I would say my stomach is okay. It's not great. And then everything, Doug, honestly changed for me when I actually took my first tech sales job in New York in 2018 and started moving into the city, because that was the first period where I started to take autonomy over my meals and learn how to cook. So I always say to people, like, because I have a lot of friends that will ask me about how to get healthier. And I say, look, if you can just prepare 90% of your meals and focus on whole foods and real ingredients, you're literally there. So, just doing that, just starting to make, ground beef, steak, chicken thighs, just very basic recipes that tasted good. I started to notice an increase in my symptoms. And then also at the same time, I started to get into endurance sports, which I know you and I have a shared passion for. So I'm doing triathlons, I'm doing marathons, I'm doing ultra marathons, and I'm getting fitter. The diet's starting to help, but at the same time, I'm still eating too many carbs. I'm eating sandwiches for lunch. I'm eating breads. I'm eating pastas. And I remember my good buddy and I signed up for a half Ironman in Lake Placid, New York in 2019. And my stomach had a big flare up and I ended up having to miss the race. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, I'm getting healthier than I've ever been. I feel in the best shape of my life. And I'm on this REMICADE drug, but I'm still feeling these symptoms. I'm missing races. My stomach's still blowing up. And fortunately for me in 2019, that's when this carnivore diet started to emerge, and lower carb and, LowCarbUSA starting to become more popularized. And we talked about this when you and I grabbed dinner. I was scrolling on Instagram one day, and I think it was February of 2019. And I see Chris Bell, the director of the great documentary, Bigger, Stronger, Faster. I see a picture of him, and I knew that Chris had struggled with weight his entire life and had issues with alcohol, drug addiction, et cetera. And I'm looking at him, and he must have lost like 80 plus pounds. He looked like a completely different person. And in the caption, he was talking about the fact that he had been keto for a year and then made a shift to a carnivore diet, so a primarily red meat diet. And I remember thinking, like, so all this guy does is he eats red meat, steak, and red meat, steak, eggs, water. That's insane, because that's the opposite of everything that I've been taught about nutrition. But at the same time, I'm thinking, okay, well, he's lost almost 100 pounds, so whatever he's doing is working. Flash forward a couple of weeks, I see Shawn Baker, Dr. Shawn Baker, get interviewed on Joe Rogan. Okay, now there's doctors that are advocating this diet. That's very interesting to me. And then everything blew open once I started seeing on the internet people that had Crohn's, colitis, autoimmune issues that claim that they were curing these diseases through a carnivore, low carb approach. And that's when all the red lights went off for me, because for me, I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, if I can use food as an actual preventative form of medicine, why would I not try this? So I gave myself a 2-week window. I remember going to Whole Foods, loading up on all the carnivore essentials, getting my cuts of red meat, getting chicken thighs, getting bone broth, getting eggs, all these essential carnivore ingredients. And I remember thinking to myself, I'll try this for 2 weeks. I can do anything for 2 weeks, and then I'll reassess. If I feel great, I'll keep doing it. And then if not, I'll go back to my old diet. I ended up feeling so good that I stuck with a strict carnivore diet for 2 months. And I'll tell you, my GI symptoms drastically increased to the point where I was only going to the bathroom once or twice a day. Like my body was actually processing the food that I was using for the first time ever. It was such a game changer. My skin got clearer, my energy, I felt like I popped out of bed with instant energy, and just my mood. Not that I ever struggled with anxiety or depression, but things that used to bother me no longer bothered me. There was just like this energetic calm that came over me. And then obviously, aesthetically, I looked the best that I ever did. I had a true 6-pack for the first time. I was getting stronger. And for me, that was the first moment that I realized, food is truly medicine. So I would say since that time, I'm not strict carnivore. I would say that I'm more animal-based and more low carbs. So I would say I vary. I try and keep my carbs under 100 grams a day. I'm not I'm not a zero carb guy. I will mix in some berries. I'll mix in some vegetables that sit well with my stomach. But the beauty of this diet is it's the ultimate removal diet. So now I know there's certain things that don't fit well in my stomach that I've been told to eat. So for me, for example, some of these dark leafy greens like spinach, like kale, they destroy my stomach. Brussels sprouts, broccoli, obviously you saute it in garlic, it's delicious, but it doesn't sit well with me. I'm going to pay the price if I eat that. Like I used to, I love chili, but I started noticing that things like beans were lighting my stomach up. So I always just tell people to keep I think a food journal is such a powerful thing, especially if you have issues with your stomach. Start to keep track of how you feel after you eat certain foods. And then as you go back, you'll start to notice patterns. But anyway, going back to my story, I'm on this animal-based approach. My stomach is continuing to get better and better. I feel great. I'm doing more endurance races. And then in 2020, right, like anything else, these drugs have natural side effects. So the REMICADE, I showed you this picture. I started getting terrible cystic acne. I started getting it on my face, on my neck, on my back, on my chest, on my thighs, basically anywhere that I was sweating, I started getting this terrible cystic acne. And so I'm going from dermatologist to dermatologist. They're trying to get me on the same antibiotics. And I'm doing research and seeing all these patients that have skin issues with REMICADE. So I finally go to my GI doctor and I say, look, what do I need to do to get off of this drug? I feel great. I don't think I have inflammation. I'm going to the bathroom once or twice a day. What do we need to do here? I'm very strict. I'm very loyal to this diet. So I went under for a colonoscopy, and he found out that not only did I not have any inflammation in my stomach, I didn't have any microinflammation. So as a result of that, he very rarely, I don't know if he's ever done this, to be honest with you, I should check with him, but he said, look, because your diet is so clean, you're committed to it, you're young, your inflammation and microinflammation is gone, I'm comfortable getting you off of this drug. So for me, it was an unbelievable feeling, because I thought that I was going to have to be on this for the rest of my life, every 8 weeks, go on a biologic, $65,000 per infusion. Who knows what would have happened in the future, but it was just such a fulfilling thing for him to get me off of it. And then also at the same time, I'm thinking to myself, why did it take for me having to ask you to get me off of this drug when you see the negative side effects that it's doing to me? And every time I would go into his office, I would look better and better on this lower carb approach. And I would ask him, I would say, Doc, what do you think about keto? What do you think about carnivore? And I could just tell that he didn't have the knowledge or insight into it. So he was he didn't have any straight answers for me. So that's why I love that you and I have gotten connected, and, connecting with doctors that have this metabolic health certification, because I want to run towards GIs and doctors that have embraced this carnivore keto lifestyle, that actually understand what I'm doing. That's my story, Doug, to be honest with you. And it's been amazing. And every year I feel like I keep getting cleaner and cleaner, and I keep connecting with other people that have similar experiences that have effectively healed Crohn's, have healed colitis, have healed IBS through a low carb and carnivore type approach.
So when you said it was $65,000 per infusion, how many infusions would you have typically in a year?
So it's a good question. So I would have an infusion every 6 to 8 weeks. And what is it? 50, how many weeks are in a year? 52.
Yeah.
So, you could do the math there on how expensive it is. And then also I was on this drug from 2016 to March of 2021. So, for these insurance companies,
that's a bucket load of money.
It's insane. So imagine all the patients that have Crohn's, all the patients that have colitis that are on these drugs, and then
that don't need to be.
Plus just the cost of insulin for diabetics. It's like Dr. Brian and I were talking about this yesterday. I mean, I would think that a CGM for someone without diabetes is such a good investment for an insurance company, because you imagine if you can reverse some of these pre-diabetic symptoms, the amount of money that these insurance companies would save would be incredible.
Yeah, but yet you still have to have a prescription in order to be able to get a CGM. I believe that's going to change fairly shortly, because there's such a need for it outside of the people that are actually diabetic. So you said that you're kind of animal-based as opposed to carnivore. Did you feel like it was necessary to do the carnivore thing, the strict carnivore thing first, in order to knock this on the head? And then once you had recovered, you found that you were able to put in. So in other words, if you had to go back again, knowing what you know, would you go with the diet you've got now to try and reverse this thing, or would you still go and do a strict carnivore thing to try and initially to try and kick it?
It's a great question. I would stick with the carnivore diet, because I felt like for me, it was the ultimate removal diet to really just get my stomach to this great baseline level. And then by doing that, I started to have a better understanding of what foods actually outside of meat actually sat well with my stomach versus what didn't. Because I always thought, steak with some Brussels sprouts and broccoli is a great meal, which I'm sure it is for some people, but with my stomach and the issues that I have, those, some of the toxins in those plants, they just don't agree with my stomach. Beans just don't agree with my stomach. So I think and I still utilize that practice, by the way. Like, I'm not perfect. Like when I went home to New Jersey for Christmas, I kind of opened up the floodgates. I said, look, I want to experiment with myself and just eat normally, have the Christmas cookies, have the pastas, et cetera, and see how I look and feel. So I did that. And then when I want to get back to baseline, I'll do a carnivore for, maybe it won't be a month, maybe it'll just be a week, but even just a week of the strict diet, things start to operate and fire the way that they should.
Yeah, and I think so, because like you said, I think everybody's different. Like you don't know what it is that's causing you to have these issues. So if you go completely strict carnivore, and then once you actually functioning properly, only then can you start adding stuff back to try and work out what things are causing issues for you. Because if you're not well, then you add stuff back. How do you know that you're already not well? So
exactly.
So yeah, I know Georgia Eid, the psychiatrist that's spoken at a lot of our events as well, and she had a lot of issues, and she went carnivore. Also with the idea that it was like an exclusion diet, right? So she would go to a strict carnivore, solved all her problems, but then she decided, like, stuff that, I'm not going back. I'm sticking with this because it's brilliant for me. So she didn't end up ever going back. We got a couple of friends of ours that did the same thing. They were like keto coaches, and they were getting a lot of questions about the carnivore diet, but they'd never done it, so they didn't know. So they decided they're going to do it for a month, and just so that they could answer the questions of some of the clients that they had. And after a month, they decided this is like, we're not going back. Like this is our life from now on.
It's amazing.
But some people feel that they need that diversity and stuff. And so they can go back and start adding stuff back. And if you notice something is starting, and that's, I think, the secret is to add things back one at a time.
One at a time.
So if you add a whole bunch of stuff back, like you do at Christmas, and you go back and eat everything, then you have no idea which of those things actually is causing you issues.
And even it was a helpful exercise, even just experiencing the holidays, because there's learning and realizing, okay, if I go back down this approach, yes, the food might taste delicious, but it's a temporary pleasure, and the side effects of that are not worth the temporary experience of like a cookie or something like that. It's like you and I were talking about, once you, first of all, you can almost change your palate to love the saltiness and the fat of red meat. And also when you do this carnivore approach, this lower carb approach, you feel, I genuinely feel like I'm a different human being in terms of like my energy, my positivity, the way that I approach other people. I'm never going back to that old approach. And also I can't, because I know that if I go back to that old approach, I'm going to be back in the hospital on some drug that's going to cost $65,000 that my whole life is going to revolve around. So no cookie or beer or drink is worth it for me.
Yeah. And I remember you telling us a story when you, like you said, we had dinner about a week ago or something, but you were saying like that you would go out like on a date or something. And you said that these girls that you were with thought that you were a drug addict or something, because like literally you had to go to the bathroom a number of times during dinner.
Oh my gosh. It was to the point where when you have colitis and Crohn's and IBS, you become very good at the way that when you walk around, you strategically think about where are the restrooms.
Where's the bathroom, right?
Your whole life is geared around that. Oh, what's the Starbucks code in New York so I could get into that bathroom? I remember I had a date on the west. We were walking up and down the West Side Highway, and I'm not embarrassed to admit it. I had to go to the bathroom 5 times over the course of an hour because that's how chronically flared up my stomach is. So that's no way for someone to live their life. And that's why I get so passionate about this, and you get so passionate about this, because you do this diet and you're able to enjoy life the way that it's meant to be enjoyed.
Yeah. So tell me, I know you're heavy into Ironman competitions and stuff like that. In fact, I think you're there right now, not for an Ironman, but for a marathon, right?
For the Austin Marathon.
Austin Marathon.
Exactly.
Were you doing, you said you were doing these things before you got cured? And especially before you got onto this carnivore type diet, what have you noticed in terms of your athletic ability, there before and afterwards? Like now that you're on this thing, how do you find that your performance has been influenced by this diet?
It's a great question. I think so. I just did I did my first full distance Ironman Waco in Texas in October of this year. So I'm not fast by any stretch of the imagination. I did this in about 14 hours. So, you're out on a course for 14 hours. It's swimming, biking, running, and the nutrition, right? People say is the 4th discipline to Ironman. And some of these people could be out on the course for 15, 16, 17 hours. You're fueling yourself for 17 hours. And the quality of nutrition is a problem because we still especially the nutrition that Ironman is providing, it's quick sugars, carbs, gels, goos, all that type of stuff that doesn't fit particularly well in your stomach. Leading up to this race, I was pretty strict carnivore, low carb. So what I did was I did most of my training in like a zone 2 lower heart rate training, stuck to my diet. And then on the race, I experimented with the nutrition that was out there. But the biggest thing was that I kept my sodium levels really high because I'm about 190 pounds. I sweat a lot. And I'll tell you, you see people whose stomachs blow up on the race. I didn't have a single issue with my stomach. I didn't have to go to the bathroom once. I didn't have any cramping. And I know that that's an effect of my diet, my nutrition, and also making sure my sodium levels are the right way, because people get so caught up on, oh, I need a gel, where I think people should be more focused on, their sodium intake and preventing cramping. So,
Yeah.
And we've talked about this before. I would love to do an ultra marathon, completely fat adapted, just eating fats, like a Zach Bitter approach. I'd love to connect with him. That's really the next thing for me, because I'm at a point now where I'd rather stick to a low carb than do races and have to rely on gels for nutrition. I'd rather just not race if I need to do that.
Yeah. And I know, even Zach does a little bit of carbohydrate, glucose infusion when he races. Mm-hmm. We had this discussion, and then that's kind of why I'm bringing it up, because I feel I'm kind of like a purist, right? Mm-hmm. And I believe that if you are properly fat adapted, there is no need to take on any carbohydrates at all. Mm-hmm. And the people that still do, they feel like they go and do all of this training, get completely fat adapted. Mm-hmm. And then in the race, they eat a bunch of carbs, and it just shuts down everything. I mean, the first thing, if you infuse a bunch of carbs, the first thing it does is shut down ketone production and shut down the gluconeogenesis that's going mm-hmm. on in your liver, because you've got a bunch of glucose in your blood suddenly. And so all of that effort that you've had to try and operate and improve the fat oxidation capacity that you have, and the ketone production and the utilization of those ketones for ATP, all of that gets shut down. Mm-hmm. So you've lost everything that you've been working so hard for. And then there's the guys that had I think I told you about it. They talk about running with a boiled sweet under their tongue.
Yes.
So that it's like a trickle. So you're not like having a huge carb meal before you start running. Yes. But now you've got this trickle. And I think I spoke to you as well. Doing Dr. Ben's workout, and I get almost immediately, when I finish it, I get a spike in glucose that I haven't touched. I haven't ingested anything. And I get a spike of glucose from 81 to like 216 or something, Yeah. And I've produced that myself, like almost instantaneously. Yes. So why would I need to consume anything, drink a Coke or a Gatorade or take a gel or something like that?
Yes.
I don't know. I still think that the people that come up, the youngsters that come up from so the youngsters that come up and are fat adapted from the beginning, and they've never run on carbs, so they don't have it in there. I still feel like people are even though they've seen the huge benefits and all of that kind of stuff for changing the way that they eat in their diet, they still can't get their heads around the fact that when they are racing, they have to have carbs, because otherwise they're just not going to be able to perform at their best.
Yes.
I still think that's a...
Yes. We were talking about this, Doug. I think that we got to try and connect you with that Dr. Dan Plews, who's, I'm pretty sure he's South African as well, low carb doctor. And he set the amateur course record for the Kona Ironman, I think 2 or 3 years ago before COVID. I think he did like an 8:30 time, straight fat adapted. He uses I think it's S Fuels as well, which is that low carb product. So he would probably be fascinating to talk to. But for me, I'm at a point now where, in terms of my morals and my principles and this commitment to this approach, I really want to keep going down this rabbit hole of fat adaptation and not have to rely on gels or fuels. Like I said, I would rather just not race than have to rely on this stuff, because I actually think that it's like, you could probably get to a point where you're doing Ironman and you're so reliant on gels and sugars that it's probably doing more harm than it is good.
Yeah. I mean, if you don't, and especially, a lot of the time you have to carry so much of that stuff with you, because, unless you've got personal seconds and stuff like that,
yes,
you can't get a lot of the stuff out on the road. So now you're carrying stuff with you, and it's especially gels and things.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, I think there's so much research and so much that we need to still learn about that, and overcome the mindset that carbs are necessary. For everything that I've seen up till now, we can produce any amount of glucose that we may need, and not, we won't produce more than we need, but we won't, but we will be able to produce what we need. And there's no benefit to taking it on even during a race. That's my opinion of what the researchers are finally going to show. But right now, the jury's still out.
Exactly. Well, hopefully we get to a point where there's these top level athletes that are willing to experiment and go down this lower carb rabbit hole and give us the data and the proof that we actually want to need. I know when we got coffee, we were talking about how Dave Scott, who's won I think he won the Ironman 5 or 6 times. He's now completely changed his tune over the last few years and is a huge ketogenic advocate and encourages triathletes to experiment with a lower carb approach. So hopefully, we get some professionals that dive and go that direction, and we can see the data and the results will follow.
Because that's the thing, when you're talking about guys that are performing at the ultimate effort, right? The elite guys, the guys that win it. So now you're going to take a guy like that still believes that he needs a bit of the glucose, and you're going to tell him, okay, now you're going to go and do Kona, but you're not going to do this and try it and see if he's got to be totally convinced that this is the better option before he's going to be prepared to do it. Yes. I think that's the hard thing, is to find someone at that level who's prepared to experiment, exactly. In a race at that level. Because that's how the guys train for the entire year for one race, and then you're telling them you're going to take a chance on that race and experiment and just see if this is better. It's hard. Exactly.
I did see some comments with that famous triathlete Lionel Sanders, who's he's the fan favorite right now, and I think he's coming second place in Kona, and he's an animal. But the last couple of years, I think he's blown up during some of the bigger races, and he has a Gatorade sponsorship, and I know he ingests a ridiculous amount of bottles and takes a lot of sugar. And I remember seeing some comments of people that were saying, imagine if he experiments with fat adaptation, could that potentially help some of the gut issues he's having, or just these issues of just blowing up towards the run of a race. So I don't know, you just reminded me of that there.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to, and maybe you can help direct some of that, as you get more and more involved in this, that maybe that can be something that you try and, get in touch with these guys and develop a relationship with them and teach them. And maybe they'll learn enough that they will believe it enough to actually do an experiment. But I mean, how else are you really going to know unless some of these top guys are prepared to do it?
Exactly. There's a gentleman that I want to connect you with that DM'd me. He sent me a DM on Twitter after he saw the post that I had about colitis and doing the Ironman. And he's extremely fat adapted endurance athlete. And I think he told me that he did an Ironman in 11 hours and ate 3 or 4 hard-boiled eggs and a bottle of salt water the entire time. Yeah. So you imagine how fat adapted a guy like that is. So I think he'd be a great guest to connect you with and have you talk with him.
Yeah, no, totally. I'd love to chat with him.
I mean, Doug, how good do you feel, being in your 50s, doing the Dr. Ben workouts on the low carb approach versus when you were in your marathon, ultra marathon days in your 30s on the high carb approach? I can't even imagine.
Yeah, it's amazing. I honestly feel I'm doing you mentioned I'm doing Dr. Ben's workout, which is a 15-minute workout twice a week, very, very high intensity. But I'm stronger now at 58 than I was when I was in my early 30s. In fact, it's stronger than I've ever been that I can remember. And at one stage, the reason I started looking for exercise was that I was starting to feel, as I was getting older, that decline in strength and decline in muscle mass. And I was trying to do some sort of workout to try and slow that inevitable decline down.
Mm-hmm.
But then I came across Dr. Ben, and it's no longer decline. I'm building muscle now at almost 60, and it's just fascinating. And I look back when I was, running 90K ultra marathons and stuff like that, and I thought I was invincible, but or bulletproof, and I could eat whatever I wanted. But if I look back at all the other little symptoms and other things that I had going on at the time, that I now know were a result of eating that way, I just wish that I had known back in those days what I know now. I would love to go back and do it all over again, fat adapted, and see how different it would be.
I know it's one of those things where you wish it's like you would never go back and do things differently, but there's always imagine if I knew what I knew now back then. And that's the amazing thing with the internet, is that, the internet has connected guys like you and I, and we get to share our experiences, and then we learn from these things, and then we get to implement it and incorporate it and see what the results are.
Yeah. But you're still young. So you're able to do these things and see for yourself, like, genuinely how much better it is for you.
I'm excited. And it's fascinating. I think why guys like you and I get so excited by this entire approach is I just think it's just the best bang for your buck to be able to say, you have these quick, strenuous 20-minute workouts. You have 1 to 2 meals a day, steak, delicious fats, and you're getting in the best shape of your life. You feel unbelievable. It affects every other discipline. It's not trying to be dogmatic. I've never seen another diet that has similar effects that are pulling people off insulin and these drugs. So
not even close.
Yes.
And that's the big thing, we still we're just talking about athletics, performance and stuff like that. But I mean, we started this conversation talking about your medical condition, and there's this is just one that I've become aware of fairly recently, is just another one of so many of these chronic diseases, so-called chronic diseases, that are not necessarily, they're not diseases, they're not progressive, they are not irreversible. All you have to do is change what you eat, and everything goes away, and that's crazy. And I think that's where it's the most important stuff is keeping people healthy and making them healthy. The ones that are sick, we're able to make so many of them like actually reverse their condition and make them better, and that's super awesome.
Yeah, like looking at food is a true source of medicine and this preventative form of care. And part of the issue too, Doug, is you, me, so many other people that we've met in this low carb space, they understand how good it feels once you're fat adapted and once you transition, the mental clarity, the energy, everything that we've been talking about. The problem is that someone that's sick almost doesn't even understand what it could feel like to feel that good.
Yeah.
So how do you help push them in that direction? I know that's what you're trying to solve for.
I think so. That's so many people become coaches. I mean, that's why LowCarbUSA came into existence. Was it like when you finally do it and you see this monumental improvement or change, it's like, how did I not know this? How did I not believe this? What can I do now? You feel compelled to try and help other people understand this especially before going through what you went through. In order to get there, why should people have to go through all that hell and then reverse it? Why not just eat right from the beginning and never ever go through that drama? That's first prize. When everybody doesn't have to go through the drama in the first place. That's awesome.
Well, one of the favorite things that you told me was, you're doing these events in San Diego, Florida, et cetera, and you're having the spouses of low carb members that are coming up and thanking you and Pam of saying like my husband or my wife is such a better person now.
So much of a, yeah.
So what is that worth, right? What price is that worth?
You mentioned it, you know, when you were talking about your situation, like how much you noticed that things didn't bug you as much anymore, that you weren't as, you just become a nicer, better person to be around. And that we hear over and over and over again, just as it's like a side effect almost of doing this. It's like, oh, and by the way, you become much more relaxed and a nicer person as well. Which is
exactly. I felt like I became a better son, better boyfriend, just more, just trusting in myself. Things that used to stress me out at work no longer did. I felt like I had more motivation. And like we were talking about before, just that feeling of being able to pop out of bed with energy, to not be hungry, to be grateful of the next 24 hours. Like that stuff is, you know, I'd pay, that's a multi-million-dollar investment in yourself by eating some grass-fed meat every single day.
Yeah, that's amazing. So mate, this has been awesome chat. I look forward to you getting back here so we can go and have another steak and chat some more.
All right. Thanks, Doug. Thanks so much for having me on. It's an honor.
All right. You've been listening to an episode of the LowCarbUSA podcast. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/LowCarbUSA.